Now, let's stay with this whole global financing and economic crisis. The IMF is not a death sentence to businesses. That is the statement from the Chief Executive Officer of the Ghana Investment Promotion Council, Yofi Grant. He was talking about Ghana's request for a bailout plan with the International Monetary Fund. Now, as part of the conditionalities to accessing these funds, the government has introduced 3 new tax measures, which the private sector has described as counterproductive. However, speaking to the concerns of the investor community, Yofi Grant said that the aim is to revamp the economy, which will inure to the benefit of the private sector. Let's hear him.
Yofi Grant, thank you for talking to JoyNews. You're in Cape Town now. You are participating in the first session. We know that you'd also be speaking in the course of the week. But let's talk about the Continental Free Trade Area. How is the GIPC positioning Ghana to take advantage of the free trade area?
Well, I mean, definitely for us, the AFCFTA has such significant relevance for Africa's economic transformation and growth. And Ghana already championing a new narrative on the continent, starting with the Ghana Beyond Aid, resonates quite well with what's happening here today. And it's a business forum, so there are lots of private sector business people here, but there are policymakers as well. And for us at GIPC, of course, we believe that first and foremost, we must work to the benefit of country. But to the extent that country extends into continent is a very attractive proposition. And once we position ourselves as a hub in West Africa, but also as the entry point into the continent through the West African portal is important, then we need to pay attention to a lot of the businesses that have a regional focus, investors that have a regional focus, and try and bring them through Ghana. But without a doubt, I mean, the bigger, wider market is a much more attractive proposition. But that is the reason why we want to position ourselves as a hub in many sectors, and I believe that we are well on course to do that.
I'm just reflecting on the theme, for example, which talks about accelerating after. It does suggest that the free trade area has not fully taken off. Do you share the same view?
Well, yes, it takes a while. I mean, if you look at the history of the EU, for example, many years ago when the architect of it, a young man called Jean Monnet from France, put it together, it took almost decades, loads of decades post-war to actualize it. And I think what we have in Africa is that there are lessons to learn from that and pitfalls to avoid, but to ensure that we can do it. I think that there's no point reinventing the wheel. We can leapfrog into action almost immediately. And I believe that, as somebody said on the panel today, Africa is not bereft of policies. We are very wealthy with policies. Now it's the implementation that almost always is a bit of a drag. But there is a tacit agreement and recognition coming up that we need to accelerate a lot of the things that we are asking for. For example, how do we improve value chains? How do we add value to our raw materials and resources? Africa is resource rich. But it's also population rich. So it's just not adding value to those resources, but also creating demand on the continent such that whatever we produce, we can market and sell within the continent. And I think that's very, very important.
You were raising some concerns about the bottlenecks earlier, and part of it has got to do with the visa requirements. For instance, between Ghana and South Africa, there was an agreement in principle to try and do visa on arrival and other considerations. Why is it taking so long for some of these bottlenecks to be removed?
I'd say even Ghana's relationship with South Africa is in an advanced form. And just this morning, I spoke to the Minister Naledi Pandor, and she spoke into our foreign minister. So I think there are some slight issues just to resolve. We do have that on operation, but that is the least of our problems. It's the other countries for which you need visas, and what it would take to unresolve some of these bottlenecks, because they are real barriers to trade and movement of people and goods and services. And we do understand that there are certain foundational stuff that would need to be resolved. For example, security, for example, goods of origin, nations of origin for goods and services and all that. But I mean, as I did say, it's really, it shouldn't be rocket science. And quite recently at the Africa Prosperity Dialogues, President Akufo-Addo was almost overwhelmingly, pleaded to lead this, charge to unresolve the bottlenecks we have with the free skies policy that we've almost all signed onto. When I had to go to an African country that I won't name for good reasons, even with a diplomatic passport, I needed a visa. And it was something that I had to do in a short time, but we had to delay the program because it took a while to get the visa. But I believe that these are some of the issues that we need to unresolve, because then it makes the architecture of trade on the continent easier and people can move freely, etc. But of course, like I said, the primary issues have to deal with foundation issues like security, identity, etc.
Right.
But once we solve that, I believe that it will open the doors, because businesses need to move, people need to move. Traders are always moving and need to get their goods across borders. And you heard recently on the panel how in some places you have days, weeks that trucks are stuck behind borders, waiting to cross just to do trade.
But in the context of Ghana, are you pushing hard? Have you been speaking to the president and those in authority to waive the visas, to revise the requirements?
Well, you know that Ghana already is working to do an e-visa, which will facilitate a lot of these, travels, and we are quite well advanced. And I suspect that by June it will be operational, and so we are advanced in ensuring that we have a real practical solution which traders and business people can use to enter Ghana, of course within the rules that we have under AFCFTA. So we are quite well advanced, and the president is very well aware of it. I mean, he's the biggest champion of AFCFTA, saying that, look, we have to make it active. Indeed, he goes beyond that and says we need to make our countries rich, and the only way we can do that is to activate trade, activate economic partnerships, and all these will start when you can easily interact, travel, go and come, etc. But it's just not that. It's also access to infrastructure. So are there any airlines that can easily get you across? It's easier, as a friend of mine said to me, it's easier to travel to Paris or France or Amsterdam than it is to get to some African countries, even within West Africa.
So that's the challenge.
So that's also a major challenge that requires investment, and that requires also the purpose of mind to say we need to just not have open skies, but we need to operationalize it and make sure that the airlines can.
And we know that you're wearing two hats here. You're also representing the group of investment promotion councils from across the continent. What position, collective position, do you have on the free trade area and how to accelerate it?
That's a big question. That's a big question because, of course, I mean, sovereignty is an issue there because every country is at a different level of economic development and priorities are different in what sort of investments you want. But without batting an eyelid, we all recognize that key critical investment into infrastructure, into energy, are very, crucial into actualizing or operationalizing the AFCFTA. Because if we produce and you can't move your goods, it's a major stumbling block. If you don't also stimulate consumption within the African market, then all your investment goes to waste. So you have to look at them in tandem. And I think the real push that needs to happen is consistency and consonance in policies to make sure that the policies work in tandem. And if there's a policy that you're activating, it's because you want to open up the market or you want to create consumption and demand within the African market that will make sure that the investment pays itself. Those are very critical. So for us at the IPA levels, we are looking at how can we come out with a common purpose, and the AFCFTA itself has the African Investment Protocol signed up. How do we come to a common purpose to ensure that we have facilitation rules and standards that will make it easier to invest in Africa, and of course in countries in Africa, and that those investments may also have a regional focus. because there are investors who want regional focus because of size. The African market is approximately 1.4 billion people with a current combined GDP of 3.4 trillion. If we are able to invest and activate a lot of the activities that we foresee, we are going to create by 2050 plus a $7 trillion economy. And there are steps that are happening. For example, I mean, the Pan-African payment platform is one that would enable Africans even invest within the continent. Intra-Africa investment today is pretty low. It's still less than 5%. And that in itself is a big trigger to also attracting foreign direct investment from outside the continent when they see Africans investing. So for example, you're looking at things like how is pension funds investing into the economies? How are they creating opportunities for private sector and SMEs and SMIs, and particularly women, to be able to invest and then trade? So there are many questions, but from the IPA point of view, we need to look at a regulatory reform that inures to our mutual benefit, and not just as countries, but between the investor and his destination country.
Finally, we're wrapping up on domestic issues. Of course, Ghana is seeking an IMF bailout, but it's also having a toll on businesses, for instance, with the new revenue measures that are being introduced. You've heard from the business community ask that you intervene, for instance, talk to those in authority, so there'll be, quote, a friendly business environment.
Absolutely.
Have you taken notice of the concerns being raised by the business community?
Yes, we have.
And how are you ensuring that after the IMF program, we do not lose investment?
Well, you know, it's interesting because investors, every investor knows that there are tax regimes. They also know there are tariffs, there are this, there are that. Most investors look for markets for growth and return and stability. And for us in Ghana, I think it's not even the tax environment that may be a problem. I think Ghana is fortunate to be politically stable, has a very friendly economy, and I keep saying on the lighter side that because we are in the center of the world, we are very well placed for logistics. So we are in a very good position to attract investment. Also, we have one of the best, should I say, investment, platforms or areas or the opportunities there. We are open, we are optimistic, and so when we create conducive and attractive investment opportunities, it's easier because the regulatory framework is constantly under review to make sure that there's mutuality in the foreign direct investor coming to Ghana. It's just not that they bring their money and then they take it out, but there's mutuality. Ghana also benefits from it. And one of the ways that Ghana benefits from it is you set up a business and you're running your business, you're going on well, you're taxed. And for me, I have a simple equation. The more investments you have, the more businesses you create. The more businesses you create, the more employment you create. The more employment you create, the more the ability of the state to claw back its taxes, to create the infrastructure, to let you grow. So it's a bit of a circular economy that we need to pay attention to. And yes, we've had quite a number of business people come back to say, well, the tax man is harassing us. I said, no. That is not what it is. For your ability to operate in this country, in our environment, of course, I mean, you have to pay your dues. And the thing is to understand where the tax man is coming from, to ensure that we correct abuses of the past and make sure that people pay the right taxes, and we all ought to be responsible to that, from the business person to the ordinary person on the street. It's important because if the government doesn't collect those taxes, it can't rectify the shortcomings of the infrastructure or even the trade architecture. It can't. It has to collect the monies to create the roads, the hospitals, the schools, and fuel the economy as well. And all of us who operate in the economy are part of that fuel mechanism. And so businesses need to pay attention to the requirements of the tax authorities. And I dare say that I think now we have a better regime where the Ministry of of Finance and the Ghana Revenue Authority speak to the business people and try to come to a common understanding of what the expectations are. But obviously, even as we take the bold step of going to the IMF, And being a member of the IMF, we contribute to it. So it's not like, it's a death sentence or a noose around our neck. It's rather to open the doors for us to go back and then create a more, conducive economy for growth, go back to macroeconomic stability, and then we can grow at a rate that we're growing pre-COVID back again.
Right.
And that requires that we ourselves are disciplined within our own economy to ensure we collect the revenues that are important and necessary, but also to grow the businesses to pay back our debts.
Yeah, very critical.
Very critical. And government is who pays those debts.
And I recall being at a news conference about a year or two ago where you were announcing that you had exceeded the foreign direct investment targets that you had set for yourselves.
Yes.
Are you shoring the numbers up?
We intend to, but it's difficult, especially post-COVID and in the advent of the Russian-Ukraine war, because there was still a further, disruption to global supply chains and global economies. And a lot of the monies that would erstwhile be used for investments are staying home or looking at other things. But there are significant opportunities for us as a country, Ghana, on reshoring, onshoring industries, and we are looking forward to attracting small and medium-sized manufacturers to come into the economy. But even more important to us is how we can plug into the global value chains as a manufacturer. And we have started the whole architecture for that with policy. So, for example, when people talk of free senior high school, they don't understand the impact on the future economy. But it's important to create a new cadre of young, better heeled, better educated people who can then accelerate to higher economies of higher earnings and higher demands. Right. So that's very important. If you don't have the manpower, you can't industrialize the way you want to. You have to create the manpower. But beyond that, then you need the policies to bring about industrialization. That's why we have the the 1D 1F policy. Today is one district, one factory. But who knows? In the near future, it might be one district, 10 factories. One district, 20, 30, 40, 50 factories. Then you are now industrializing. But thirdly, we are very resource rich as a country. We have gold, diamonds, timber, bauxite, iron ore, and lithium, oil and gas. So even in energy transitions, Ghana can play a very important role because we have all the mineral resources required for transition energy. And so we are speaking to quite a number of investors who are looking at that space, but we did declare that we want to add value to our raw materials and resources, which is very important. Because then you move further up the value chain of business, and then you export and export more than you import. And I must say, we do have a very interesting trade balance. Now we are exporting more than we are importing. So trade balance is being gradually addressed. Right. Now we need to work on how to stabilize the economy. And that means that we need to work more. We need to export even much more than we were before, or we are now. And we are going to leverage on the resources we have to do that.
Yofi, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
Okay.
And that's Yofi Grant speaking to our very own Blessed Soga this evening.